Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Robb, and I'm the president of the National Training and Simulation Association, NTSA. For those new to NTSA, we're a nonprofit association dedicated to facilitating dialogue between government, industry, academia on topics related to providing the best training solutions for our warfighters and first responders. So it's our pleasure to have you join us today. We host a portfolio of 9 events every year, the last of which is SAIC in December, which is the largest training and simulation conference in the world. So we invite you to that right up front. Today's discussion is a part of an ongoing dialogue about adaptive learning. NTSA is fully supportive of transforming our education process, and we work with ADL and a bunch of other organizations on how we can make training better for the same group that we support. Adaptive learning is catching on inside and outside of OSD and DoD and different agencies. And there's several notable efforts ongoing to truly transform all parts of the education and training process. So we look forward to that. And I look forward to hearing today's discussion and learning from it. Following the panel's opening remarks, our speakers will be able to answer the questions you provided in advance and also respond to those that you might put in during the session. The webinar is scheduled for an hour, so we like to respect that your time as well. So let me get to the point now of introducing our moderator, Janet Spruill. So she's going to introduce herself about business-wise, but I just want to say a few things about Janet. She's a serial volunteer, previous chair at ITSIC, and she serves as the NTSA scholarship chair as well. So she has been dedicated to this community and adaptive learning for a long, long time. She's a great talent and a great supporter of what we do, and we thank her for moderating today. So thank you, Janet, and back over to you.
Thank you, Admiral Rob, for those really kind words. I really appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. It's really my pleasure to welcome all of you who are joining in for what I'm really certain is going to be an informative and a relevant discussion today on adaptive learning. I'm Janet Spruill. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Programs at Aptima, and I've been involved in human performance consulting and leading enterprise learning programs for most of my career, and primarily in the government and defense sector. At Aptima, I lead a part of our organization that takes our science-based adaptive learning technologies and other technologies that are developed and matured in our research and development group, and we field those as scalable solutions to address our customers' training and readiness challenges. And I am thrilled today to have an exceptional panel joining me. Together, they bring a really broad set of insights and experience, including their expertise in the science and the technologies of adaptive learning, experience leading and implementing programs, and also insights from the perspective of a government sponsor. As Admiral Rob said, when you registered, you had the opportunity to submit questions, and we received quite a few. After each of our speakers has had a chance to tell you a little bit more about themselves and share some of their introductory remarks, we're going to dive right into those questions. You will be able to continue submitting questions throughout the hour, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those as we can, time permitting. So now I have the honor of briefly introducing the experts that we have on our panel today. First, Michele Harrison, who's the Deputy Director for Strategy, Innovation, and Voluntary Education for the Naval Education and Training Command, NETC, in Pensacola. Michele will be sharing NETC's adaptive learning vision and also some of her own insights from the My Navy Learning adaptive learning program that she has championed. Welcome, Michele. Next, Dr. Bob Sottilare, who's the Director of Learning Sciences at Soar Technologies. Bob also serves as chairman of the board for the Adaptive Instructional Systems, or AIS Consortium, which is an industry group that supports the adoption of adaptive learning, artificial intelligence, and other advanced technologies to help people learn. Welcome to you, Bob. And Dr. Jill Wierzba, Jill is an instructional designer, human performance expert, and a learning engineer at SAIC. And she's going to be talking to us about her experience leading an adaptive learning program for the United States Air Force Pilot Training Next initiative. Welcome, Jill. So I wanted to start by sharing some perspective on why we wanted to dedicate a webinar to this topic of adaptive learning. And I think it may be pretty straightforward. Personalized and adaptive learning has attracted quite a bit of interest across the federal government and the Department of Defense, with well over a dozen new programs starting in the last 2 years, at least to my knowledge. Some have even called adaptive learning the next major wave in training modernization. Whether you subscribe to that idea or not, there's clearly a lot of interest in how adaptive learning can help optimize training outcomes in an environment that is continuing to experience very rapid change. The need to train faster and smarter has never been greater. So today we want to take a snapshot of some current efforts and then explore both the opportunities as well as the barriers. As a jumping off point, let's take a few minutes and start by looking at what we mean when we say adaptive learning. I think it's important first to say that the practice of adapting and tailoring instructional approaches to individuals is not at all new. I think many of you have experienced instructors and educators providing one-on-one tutoring, both to help a struggling student or even to provide more challenging content to an advanced student. And that's proven to be extremely effective. Benjamin Bloom, who is the educational psychologist behind Bloom's taxonomy that many of you know, conducted a research study, and he found that the average student who was tutored using tutored one-to-one performed better than 98% of the students in the control class that had one teacher to 30 students. So we know tailoring learning to individual students works. The challenge that I've seen over my career has been until now, how do we do that at scale? Fortunately, a lot of recent advances in technologies like cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and machine learning now do make it feasible to bring adaptive learning to scale. In my work with our defense clients, there always seems to be a few common goals that have had them consider adaptive learning. And it's been interesting to me that these goals have been pretty universal, whether the adaptive learning solution we provided was to train a foreign language, to support military maintenance and troubleshooting, to teach tactical system operation, or even annual training for security compliance. Even though the use cases and training content can vary greatly, our customers generally had one or more of these goals in mind that you see here. For the purpose of our discussion today, we'd like to use a basic definition here that summarizes adaptive learning and identifies its technology enablers. This slide also briefly identifies some of the distinguishing characteristics of adaptive learning, and I'd like to just walk through those. Tailors individual learning pathways. Adaptive learning monitors and updates the student's learning path in real time as additional learner data is captured. And this results in a unique and nonlinear path through the material, unique for each student. It provides instant feedback based on their performance. It increases learner engagement and control by taking a student-centered approach. And that allows students to make decisions and take control of their own learning. It also skips content that the student has already mastered and can assess for that. And that can greatly reduce the training time. It validates mastery versus seat time. And to me, this is huge. When I came to Aptima a little over 5 years ago, I was really excited to see the science-based adaptive learning technologies being developed in the R&D group, because as a career learning and performance professional, I could now see how we could finally have a data-driven way to answer some of the questions we've always wanted to answer, like, are our students really learning? And how can we know for certain that they're proficient? I think this is one of the most important benefits and characteristics of adaptive learning. And then the ability to preempt knowledge decay. We know that typically students leave a course, whether it is an electronic course or a live course, and have already lost some of the knowledge that they've gained. An adaptive learning system can predict, using data, when a student's knowledge will fade, and then precisely reinforce it at the right time. So now that we've looked at some of the common goals and characteristics, I'd like to now go to our panel for their introductions and initial remarks. Let's start with Jill. Jill, why don't you please tell us a little bit about yourself and also the program that you've been leading?
Yeah, hey everybody, thank you, Janet. So I am a contractor with SAIC, but I've been supporting the Pilot Training Next initiative, which is a facet of Air Education Training Command for the U.S. Air Force for about 3 years. And their kind of call to action is to innovate and update pilot training for AETC. The main problem that they are trying to address is a pilot shortage crisis. Essentially, the current training pipeline that exists is insufficient to provide the number and quality of pilots that they need. And really part of the problem is that the current system works just fine. Just like a lot of industrialized training pipelines, it works good enough that it's hard to step away from. And so they've been doing it for decades. So what PTN is trying to target is to do a few things. So they need to be able to train pilots faster, more efficiently, without any loss of quality. So really big emphasis on that last one. We don't want any lower quality, and maybe even higher, because the demands of an operational environment are only ever increasing. They also need to reduce instructor podium time, but at the same time increase one-on-one instruction. So just like what Janet was talking about, that one-on-one instructor to student time is so valuable. We want to maximize that time for instructors. And I mean, really the easy answer is to throw a bunch of people at the problem. But just like a lot of us, we're dealing with do more with less environment, and that goes for personnel resourcing as well. And then lastly is for us to lean into what we know from adult learning theory and learning science at large is student-centric learning is better than a syllabus-centric path for learning. So I'm just the training and academics team lead for this initiative. PTN takes on way more to the entire umbrella of technology, from VR goggles to biometrics to building new airframe simulators. And I'm just taking the learning science perspective here. So I just want to share a little bit about my experience in this project and some of my own takeaways with you all today. So my team's approach was to really lean into the learning science and apply it as heavily as possible that it made sense. We did have some time and timeline constraints, so we decided to tackle the knowledge level academic modules to develop into adaptive modules. So there's a lot more learning that the student did from applied and performance requirements, but we didn't tackle those this first round, just the academic level. And so even what Janet was talking about with like Bloom's taxonomy and the Ebbinghaus research that talks about decay of knowledge, like we applied all of that in our design and implementation of the adaptive modules, as well as using a COT solution for the actual AI adaptive engine to push into a custom built delivery method. So what we found was that, number one, very well received by the students. Everyone had very positive things to say from their experience using those adaptive modules. Secondly, is that we found a good reduction in overall academic seat time. And so just like Janet was talking about too, is every student is going to get exactly the amount of time that they need to learn the material. Some people go a little bit faster, some people go a little bit slower, And that's great, right? Use the time that you need, no more, no less. And another note on that is just because you can reduce time for like academic sitting in a classroom, if you will, it just gives you more time available to practice other things in other ways. So a lot more valuable applied practice time availability. And then we also found that we were able to increase instructor time availability for that one-on-one coaching. So we were able to significantly reduce the required hours of like podium time that content made sense to put into the adaptive modules themselves. But we actually increased the time available for instructors to be able to have one-on-one coaching time. So a lot of that either built into briefing or debriefing, kind of daily stand-up kind of things. And I would like to lean into that too for broader implications. Not only do the adaptive modules give us the capability to pinpoint learning need for both individual students as well as an entire cohort, you can see exactly who's being successful, who needs help, and maybe where the whole class needs help, literally by a click of a button. Is the key to that data is that it's tailored, meaningful, and actionable. You get information to the people who can actually do something with it. And by reducing instructor load, and I dare say burden, with all the responsibilities that instructors tend to get pushed on them, because they're the best. They know what they're doing. They are the experts in that field. Of course, we would ask them to do more, but you don't want to overload them so much that you're going to burn your best people out and they're going to walk out the door. That's probably the last thing that any of us want. And so to design a system that allows for instructors or teachers to do what they love doing, which is sharing stories and examples and answering real-time questions that connect dots for students, it's definitely a win-win for students as well as instructors. And so right now we're kind of wrapping up and rolling up all the data from this small group tryout. But the plan is to implement the lessons learned and best practices in the next PTN focal point. Thank you.
Yeah, that's super, Jill. Thank you so much. And I really like how you emphasized there in that last column, pinpointing the learning need and doing that both for individuals and also groups. And I would imagine that you can also use that similar data to identify underperforming learning content, right, that may need update.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, very good. So thank you very much. All right, I'd like now to go to Bob. Bob, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you've been doing in this area, including the consortium that you lead?
Sure. Thanks, Janet, for inviting me to participate on this panel. I've been heavily involved in adaptive training research since about 2006, but I've been an interested bystander a lot longer than that, and adaptive training efforts have been tracked back into the 1980s. So my adaptive training research efforts have been conducted as part of government. I've been part of Army and Navy S&T programs, my graduate research at UCF, and then more recently my work at Soar since 2018, all told about 40 years of experience in training technology and in the learning sciences domain. So I am leading an AIS consortium, Adaptive Instructional System Consortium, where our goal is to enhance capabilities and market opportunities for our members and to support the global community with open source products. So from an industry perspective and from a kind of AIS consortium perspective, I'm going to give you my opinion on, based on my current roles in industry and the consortium. And first, I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the in industry. All right. So again, the goal, for many of you who are out there in the audience, right, who are industry members, right, I tried to tailor this to make it meaningful for you. So if you're in my position and you're you're out there and you're looking for work and you're developing business and writing proposals and doing all those kinds of things that folks in industry do. Hopefully some of this will be useful to you, or maybe at least generate some questions that'll be helpful. So, looked at it from the perspective of a goal of developing organizational opportunities in both research and in development, and the strengths of adaptive instruction. And again, I kind of mixed terms during this talk, and we won't get into details about what the differences are between adaptive learning, adaptive instruction, adaptive training, adaptive education. It's generally just applications. But this idea of tailoring individual and team training to be more engaging, to be more efficient in terms of the training, so we can reduce the contact time, or we can use the same amount of contact time to increase the knowledge and skills of individuals who are moving more quickly through content, to be more effective in terms of looking at, like Janet mentioned, and Jill touched on, hey, there's a bunch of data there. We can use that to look at maybe underperforming content. And so this idea of a self-improving system is an important concept in adaptive training. So, and then finally, kind of the long pole in the tent for these things is it's really costly to author and develop these systems in terms of the interfaces and processes, and being able to lower the bar so that people who don't have computer programming or instructional design skills experience, but who are experts in the domains of instruction, can go ahead and provide a input in a meaningful way without having to have those specific skills. And so there are lots of opportunities that are out there in terms of RFPs across. If you look at the SBIR rounds, if you're a small business, there's quite a focus on adaptive learning, training, and instruction. At least one round every year has at least one topic. All right. Most years there are more than that, and they cut across organizations like Office of Naval Research, AFRL, Army Futures Command, ADL, DAU, and of course, the NETC has activities like Ready Relevant Learning and the My Navy Learning Program. So the Army synthetic training environment has also included topics for adaptive learning solutions, and the Army Distance Learning Program is out there now, and they're including adaptive training and education requirements in their calls. So lots of opportunities for a big community with lots of specialized skills at this point. And so, organizational decisions about whether to enter this marketplace is, centers primarily on build, buy, or enhance, and this idea of maximizing your return on investment and hopes of developing future opportunities. So, this idea of building systems from scratch, obviously you're making an investment up front about certain people with specific skill sets that can support this kind of development. Being able to buy that, you might make a decision, hey, I want to be involved in this, and I have certain skills on my roster, but I'm missing a few, and so I want to subcontract and work with other companies who maybe have more experience in this area. And then finally is this idea of being able to enhance or extend the capabilities of open source solutions. And I always talk about the Generalized Intelligent Framework for tutoring, since I was heavily involved in the creation of that. Next slide. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about this from the adaptive learning community perspective. And so I've got a little bit here. Let me pull this up. Yeah, I've got my, all right. So again, the goal is, if you're looking at it from a community perspective, I like to look at things that way. what's that saying? Admiral Rob can probably correct me, but it's like, let's see, all ships rise in a high tide or something to that effect. So how do we create a high tide? And so we do that mainly by promoting, an open and competitive marketplace, right? That sounds counterintuitive, but it actually creates more opportunities that way. And so the strengths are, looking at how do we provide value-added, evidence-based, and ethical solutions to that marketplace. And innovation occurs through the transfer of new ideas from emerging tech that's generally coming from universities. And, we want that to be able to move from state of art to state of practice. And then we want a healthy research base and a healthy commercial market. And so we're helping to do that. The little chart on the right-hand side there looks at global projections. I got this from Grandview Research and a couple of other research organizations that provide this kind of data. And I looked at across online education, AI and education market, and the global smart education and learning market. And you can see all of them are increasing, right, to some degree, but the real heavy focus is in the global smart education and training market, which is adaptive training or adaptive instruction or adaptive learning. So lots of opportunities to participate and influence what that community looks like, what the standards look like. And so there is an IEEE project, 2247. If you want to know more about that, you can drop me a line at either my SoarTech email or the other email, and you will get a copy of these slides so with the links. So that's a good thing. So what we're attempting to do through IEEE is set up some common conceptual model that has common components and functions. And then there are unique solutions for each one of those things within those constraints. And that promotes interoperability standards, practices for the evaluation of systems, adaptive learning systems, and then ethical use is also a consideration. And so recommended practices for ethical use of adaptive instructional systems as part of that effort. I mentioned open source and licensed solutions that are globally available. We have taken, quite a bit of effort dedicated to setting up a cloud-based environment that you can download, what's called the Global Learning Toolkit, which will be an offshoot of GIFT. And so you can reach that at AIS Consortium, all one word, .cloud. Modeling trends and individual competency to influence different training experiences is going to be important. Being able to support some mixed initiative dialogue and interactions. And so this idea that there's a tutor and the tutor broadcasts to you on some regular pieces of content. It's important for the learner to be able to interact with the tutor, and so solutions in that area are going to be important. And then just evidence-based assessments for both individual learners and for teams is going to be a big deal moving forward. And so that you can track that evidence and then use that in competency models that can support future training events, whether they're adaptive or not. And then community decisions. And again, this goes back to ethical use and the elimination of bias in data and resulting models. And it's important to understand that, hey, that data that you choose and where you get it from, it can affect what the resulting model is. And so you want that to be supportive broadly, all right? And if you can do that, you'll be part of the market. So that's it for me.
All right, Bob, thanks. Thanks so much. All right, and finally, Michele. Michele, the Navy's been a really strong advocate for modernizing training through Ready Relevant Learning, and you have been really a tireless champion throughout that. Tell us more about yourself and some of those efforts, please. Need you to come off mute, please.
Sorry, Janet. I've been with the Navy for going on over 33 years. And as such, I've held several positions, many positions within the Navy. Seems like if there's a need for somebody to do something, it gets sent to me. But one of several of my hats is handling the strategy. I am considered the Chief Strategy Officer for Naval Education and Training, and ultimately our force development or domain. And also part of what I am responsible for is innovation and R&D. And that's where we get to the My Navy Learning project that we have been working for several years, and Janet has been a part of that. So I am going to go to my next slide and give you, hopefully I am, yes, just to give you a little overview of what we have been focusing, one of the things we've been focusing on for many years. For me, this total learning architecture, adaptive learning started probably 8 to 10 years ago through submissions for a future Navy capability project. And finally, it was accepted and funded for R&D. And we have been working that, really, it started back in 2016 with ONR with a project called the Learning LCAPA, Learning Competent Content and Performance Aid. So, and then people didn't know what that was, so we kind of moved to My Navy Learning. And we've completed the R&D phase. That was done in 2021, really. We completed that, and now we're in the transitioning stages of the program, which many of you may know what we call this Valley of Death. But we're getting pretty good at this Valley of Death, and I will say the number one key thing for me and my team is perseverance. And we have persevered to where we are today with this new capability. What you see here in the OV1, it's really at the 30,000 foot view. So, and I'm not going to go into any details on all of it, but you can see where My Navy Learning is down below and linkage to what we call our learning stack. The learning stack are those key components of that we need from an IT standpoint to deliver training and to be able to utilize adaptive learning and get feedback, which are the key areas that we're trying to do with My Navy Learning. That's where you can see down at the bottom, we have the core components and capabilities of My Navy Learning. So with that, I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see on the right-hand side, one of the key capabilities is adaptive learning, along with enhanced user experience and the training effectiveness. So this is, as you see, a career-long learning continuum. That is the key to this too, is a career-long learning continuum. One of the key components of what we call ready relevant learning, which many of you maybe have heard about, and I could explain more if you want. I'm going to move to the next slide. I am trying to move to the next slide. Okay. A part of the My Navy Learning is what we call the adaptive triangle, and there are 3 components, which are the key factors that contribute to adaptive learning. As you can see here, there's the competency framework, which is critical, the content reuse, and the learner record, which will enable us to deliver personalized and tailorable training throughout a sailor's career. And when I say that, I mean from hire to retire. It's also doesn't just include training, it will include the professional development and education. On the right are those common architecture components that will help deliver My Navy learning, but are ultimately necessary to deliver training to our sailors in the schoolhouses and hopefully ultimately in the fleet. So I'm just going to now show you this is a part of the My Navy learning, which is the sailor interface. A big part of what we're trying to do is bring put the sailor in the focus of our learning. And it will be kind of a one-stop place for them to go for all of their learning professional needs. As you can see up at the top, there is a timeline. It's an interactive timeline, and it will provide sailors. What we're doing is we're pulling in, as you see the career flow maps on the left, career-long learning continuums are being developed for all enlisted Navy ratings right now. Those will be pulled into this system, which will help identify those training needs, as well as their professional needs, their certifications that they can get, and educational opportunities. You can drill down more in depth there. On the right-hand side, up at the right corner, where it says My Training, is really a snapshot of the sailors' training and where they are for that particular training aspect. It gives them an individual progress, so it gives a feedback mechanism to them. In the center is really the key to our user interface, which is what we call the Sunburst. It's our primary focus in it to provide interactive and intelligent recommendations and feedback to the sailors. It's the launch pad to distribute learning, to provide that distributed learning environment as we move forward with ready, relevant learning. You can drill down into each of those aspects. It will guide a sailor through their training, and then we will ultimately be linking with our fleet partners and brethren out there to get feedback from them on how students are doing and where they may need additional training to fill in those weaknesses that they may have to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. So the last slide I have really is just a Sunburst, so I wasn't going to go into that, but I am very glad to be here and look forward to your questions. I just gave a brief overview, but I'm always available for questions. Thank you, Janet.
All right. Thanks so much, Michele. So we're going to drive forward. But before we do, Michele, we did get a question. I'm wondering if you could just quickly answer in follow-up, because obviously a lot of people are very interested in the adaptive learning programs going on across government. We're only touching on a handful of those here. But one of the questions was, does NETC have plans to conduct industry outreach programs like PALT or Industry Days to promote some of these acquisition opportunities around this? Could you just take maybe 30 seconds and answer that?
Yeah, definitely. Ultimately, we do industry outreach now, just within our office. But as this moves forward, it is really going to incorporate our what we call our NETC N6 or IT, and also our boss up in DC with My Navy HR community. PEO MLB has been brought on as an acquisition agent. So with their support in us, there will be industry outreach. That has not been scheduled, but I'm sure within the near future that will be. I hope that answers the question. If there's ever any other questions, they can always reach me.
All right. Thank you very much, Michele. All right. So what a powerhouse panel. Let's go ahead and jump right into the Q&A. I feel like we're only going to scratch the surface here, but I am monitoring the live questions. So some of the advanced questions we had were around the science and the learning theory behind adaptive learning, especially since a lot of the focus seems to be on the technologies. And Jill, I love that you mentioned the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve used to predict when knowledge decay would occur, so content can be reinforced. But I'd like to ask you and others, what are some of the learning theories and learning strategies that really underlie adaptive learning and help differentiate it? Jill, would you mind?
Yeah, so the first two things that pop into my head is that kind of proximal development of being challenged just a little bit. Vygotsky, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
Yep.
And how do you, like a master trainer knows exactly what their apprentice needs in this moment. And so that's when an adaptive learning engine is looking to provide for that student. What is the next best thing for them to do? What is a little bit challenging so that they continue to improve as quickly as possible? And then the other thing that pops into my head is that not only are, the AI and ML engines designed with learning theory in mind, but also the design of the program itself. So there needs to be kind of a give and take of how you're applying that learning science.
Yep.
I think that's probably a misconception that it's just throw stuff in there and it'll make sense. Well, if you've got good data, it will. But if it's too busy or messy or doesn't have the right stuff, you're not going to train your AI very well.
Okay, super. So that zone of proximal development, which is used pretty consistently, that's something that we employ as well, just to keep a learner in that sweet spot, right? Not too hard, not too easy. And that's also very related to the deliberate practice theory, right? Where an adaptive learning system gives a student new content by modifying existing content according to their assessed weaknesses, right? So it's able to bring them along in that way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, deliberate practice makes me think too of, you could have the best learning resources in the world, and if the student isn't engaged in the right way, they're not going to get a whole lot out of it. So letting the technology kind of take that of keeping the student very engaged and monitoring that helps tremendously as well.
Okay. I'm going to move on question-wise to a next question, and let's talk about the training content. So a lot of government and defense organizations have large amounts of legacy courseware that needs to be converted as they consider adaptive learning. Michele, what would you say are some of the key considerations that the Navy's had to consider when converting both legacy and also some of the new RRL course content to an adaptive model?
One of the critical things is how do we make the content where it could be used and read in an adaptive learning environment through AI and machine learning, and breaking that content up into smaller pieces if it's legacy, and even the RRL content, breaking it up, tagging it correctly so a sailor can find that information they need immediately. So another critical aspect is the data interoperability. That is something that's critical, and taking, this is a new environment, a digital learning environment for our sailors. And what is critical are some of the, making sure we're using the industry standards to develop our content so it can be interoperable across the Navy, because not just NETC training, but what we're looking at is My Navy Learning, and with Ready Relevant Learning is the whole learning experience. So, data interoperability is critical, and we are pushing those industry standards that we've been developed through ADL so we can all talk to each other. Our services now are talking to each other on how we can do this, and can we partner together on some of this. So, ultimately, we got to increase quality and decrease skill decay. And that is where we're shooting for. But having XAPI statements are critical, and they have to be detailed enough towards the competency level, not just how many times somebody went in, how long they took the training. They've got to be much more detailed and precise based on competencies that we expect. Does that answer the question, Janet?
Yeah, that's very good. So you've kind of hit on a number of things there: the granularity, the standards, et cetera. Very good. So Jill, have you found similar challenges in converting Air Force content?
Yeah, and I was just nodding along with Michele for a non-instructional designer or somebody who's not familiar with adaptive learning, it is deceivingly simple to just throw content into an engine and let it be perfect. And so making sure that you're being deliberate with how everything is being tagged and what is the data that you can and want to be used for learner progress information. There was a question in the chat, I think, about what does your LRS data look like? And I think the answer is it depends. What do you want? What can you get? How good is the data coming off of your, spectrum of devices, be it, computer-based stuff or maybe in a VR virtual environment. And so it's going to be varied and just knowing that you can probably use it at some point, but can you use it right now, and being very deliberate about how you go about it.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. So Bob, let's come back to the technologies now. And I know we could do over an hour just digging into the technologies, and we've really only got a couple of minutes to talk about this, but we received a couple of advanced questions asking to elaborate on the technologies and specifically the different kinds of algorithms. And then in the live chat, Derek Chung asked a live question: what kind of algorithms and software tools are used in adaptive learning use cases? Can you take just about 2 minutes and walk us through that?
Yeah, so I put something in the chat for Derek, and hopefully that, if not, then follow up and we can talk about it in more detail. But I mean, it depends on it always depends on what you're trying to do with machine learning, right? Are you trying to classify or assess the learner's state, whether it's their performance state or their emotions or workload management states, so that you can determine some state, so then you can go from there and make some decisions about what content to provide or whether to change the difficulty level of the problem space or the scenario. So it really does depend. If you're using it for decision making, obviously you want to try to optimize your decisions for that particular individual or team, for that particular scenario. So there are sets of conditions, and so it's the perfect place, right? It's really difficult for a person, right? I used to just marvel at what battle masters would do at these different training centers, whether it was in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force. You have somebody sitting there and they're trying to make adjustments to what's going on in the scenario in real time. And that's really difficult to assess how that's going to impact people. And so being able to use data to help drive those decisions is important. Lots of stuff out there in terms of what types of algorithms to use, whether it's Markov decision processes or whether they're, there's some kind of neural network or deep neural network are popular now. And so, the important piece is, getting the data, understanding what the features are that are going to lead you to whatever conclusions you're trying to reach or decisions, and then building bunches of models and testing those models really fast so you can pick the best ones.
Okay. All right. So I think the takeaway here is it depends, right? And that I think that's true in answer to a lot of questions. While it's enabled by artificial intelligence, machine learning, lots of data, the specific kinds of algorithms really can differ, right? As can some of the learning strategies, as can some of the meta tagging standards that you use. So, and what people will find is that across the board, if you look at each use case here, and ones that we haven't touched on already, Some are interested in commercial off-the-shelf adaptive platforms. Others are implementing tailored platforms that are custom built. And I think that kind of plays into the challenges in implementing adaptive learning in defense environments. So I'd like to go there next. We did get a number of questions about the obstacles that exist today. Those obstacles can be everything from change management to security to having the right skill set. But in the little bit of time that we have left, could each of you, just in very short form, tell us what you see as the biggest hurdle today to implementing adaptive learning at scale, and perhaps what could be done to address that? And Jill, if you'd like to respond, would you mind going first?
Yeah. So I think what you were alluding to with the cybersecurity concerns is definitely something that must be at the top of the list to have appropriately dealt with, and a maintenance plan that goes along with it. In my minimal experience, it's very easy to find a COT solution that meets your needs that is not secure at all, and that's absolutely inappropriate for military work, obviously. And so making sure that you're going through all your paces, and I'm certainly not a cyber expert by any means, but getting the right expertise and the right APIs and so forth, and under the right IL setting, whatever you need. And then the second thing is to make sure that whatever you have as small of a piece that you're going to start to implement that's adaptive is as easy and UI friendly as possible, to make sure that it's well received as soon as you can, to get that adoption rolling as quickly as you can.
Okay, super. Thanks. Michele?
Well, some of the biggest hurdles, I will tell you, for us, security is always an issue, but how do we deliver training to the point of need, which is one of the objectives and visions for Ready Relevant Learning. My Navy Learning is that solution to do that. But then you're talking about delivering in the classroom, you're talking about delivering peer side, as well as an afloat environment, which is necessary to get the feedback that we need to make sure our training is on board and is up to speed as quickly as possible. Also, another struggle we've had is everybody always goes to the IT solutions, but the content is another critical solution, and trying to get some of our IT people to realize that that is important, and the linkage between all that and that interoperability and that data. Their focus can be on IT, not the data, which is so important for what we're doing.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And Bob, did you want to respond to that as well?
Yeah, real quick. I think, just the number of processes that you're dealing with in an adaptive learning environment, right? Assessing the learner, making decisions about what to do next, what to do in terms of, recommendations either within that particular training or future training in order to make up gaps in skills and knowledge. So it's really important to be able to, I think, to make it practical is to be able to automate a lot of these processes, right? And especially ones that have to do with authoring, because just sit down and pick your favorite adaptive training framework, right? And try to author in it. And it is a tedious process without automation. So I would say, yeah, automation.
Might be a good place to apply some AI as well.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Very good. It looks like we have time for one more question before I ask you for your closing remarks. And we received two related questions. One asked, please tie in how this adaptive learning approach can be applied to immersive technologies. And another asked, is it possible to customize training to suit an individual's capabilities for training on simulators? And I love this question because this is really where so much of our work has focused. While a lot of the adaptive learning that has come from higher ed and a lot of the platforms is focused on electronic courseware type adaptation, most of the work, the early work in the military and a lot of our work is capturing and bringing in that data from simulation environments or simulators and converting it to meaningful measures of performance, and then using that to tailor a learning path through simulation scenarios. So I would just say that the concepts are all very, very similar. It's all still reliant on data, and it's enabled by AI and machine learning. Would be interested in your thoughts as well. And Jill, I think you had some ideas on that.
Yeah, and whoever was asking those questions is absolutely asking the right questions. That is the essence of why, military training at large is a significant different environment than higher ed, for example, is because of the psychomotor capability that military members need to develop that are critical for operational environments. And a lot of that needs to be done in a safe enough environment, a good enough simulator for the level of training that they're doing. And just like Janet was saying, the quality of data, how that comes off of that device and how it gets pushed into your ecosystem and what it means makes a really big difference. And again, easier said than done in some cases. And trying to use, an off-the-shelf flight simulator has a ton of data. But what does it mean? And so making sure you're getting good data to train your AI or to inform the ML solution is very critical, very doable, but some work that needs to be done up front to have it useful.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jill. So the promising part is it's being done. The technologies support it, and there's a lot more information that can be shared on that. Thanks so much. Well, unfortunately, we need to pause here with the questions. But I really do hope that perhaps we'll have another opportunity to continue this discussion. I think it's really been interesting for me. I hope it has for you as well. To wrap up, I'd like to ask each of our panelists in just about 1 minute to share any final thoughts you have, insights, additional resource, or maybe even a challenge for all of us. Michele, would you please go first?
Okay, sure. For me, this has been a journey, a long journey. So, and I think that you just, as if you're industry or whatever, you sometimes have to be very patient with us and what we're doing in the Navy because there are a lot of challenges and people to get this thing through, for an adaptive learning environment, adapting in an interoperable environment through what we call the total learning architecture is a challenge. But I believe now, and I'm not going to say the other services are doing it as well, but we're finally breaking that paradigm to move into this adaptive learning environment. So I feel very good where we are today. I wouldn't have said that about 6 months to a year ago, but I do feel extremely good to where we are today. A few demos and a lot of persuasion and having a flag officer always helps. So I'm not sure if it really answers the question.
I think it does.
That's my perspective, and I appreciate being here. Thank you.
All right. So we've got just a couple minutes left. Jill, if you could share some quick insights as well.
Yeah, so I think, and a question that came in prior to the webinar was, how do you take all of this old, or I hate to say archaic training and make it adaptive? And I would say pick the right piece and start there. Be very strategic and deliberate with what you select, and that's going to get the ball rolling in the right direction for you.
All right, great. Thank you. And Bob, close us out.
Okay. Yeah, so I was going to touch on a few things. I'll do it really quick. Organizational memberships and events. This is kind of a leave behind. We talked a little bit about the consortium. The consortium has planned for the 4th year in a row to have an event at ITSAC, and so look for us there.
Great.
AI and Education Society, if you're interested in, you have a heavy interest in AI, that's a great society. It's applied to learning, and It's, they have an annual conference and a society. It's really terrific.
Okay.
Open source adaptive instructional architectures. So I talked a little bit about GIFT. There's a link there. Also, there's a link for the Global Learning Toolkit, which is the consortium's variant of that. I have some recommended readings. You can take a look at those things. If you're really focused on research, I would go to the gifttutoring.org documents tab. There is about 10 years of stuff there, including the symposium proceedings and the design recommendations for intelligent tutoring systems. And then there's tons of stuff out there on how people learn. So
thank you, Bob.
Jump in.
All right. Very good. So once again, my sincere thanks to Jill, Michele, and Bob. If you'd like to learn more, check out the resources. I know we'll get some good adaptive learning papers at ITSIC. There are 2 special events on adaptive learning planned. The IEEE one that Bob mentioned. The second is an adaptive learning panel of government leaders moderated by Aptima's Daniel Serafiti. So thank you all. And Admiral Rob, turn it back to you to close us out.
Thanks, Jan. What a tremendous event. You guys did a terrific job. I thought there was a wonderful mix of the actual science of learning piece of this, which is pretty hard to talk about, honestly. And then, but you also talked about opportunities and things that your services organizations are doing in RFP land, so there was a great mix of opportunities out there, as well as educating us about what we can do moving forward. As I said, the 10 years I've been here, I've seen movement in this area. It started in the big pieces with Admiral Moran coming down to ITSIC about 5 years ago, in which we discussed ready, relevant learning in its very early days. And he went off and got a lot of resources, and he became very much a supporter of this. And so key to that was showing that it actually saved money and that it improved training. And I think that we are making progress. So, and Michele talks about going through that frozen middle and finding adaptive leaders that are willing to adapt to something like this. That's a great challenge, and I'm here to help in all cases. So let us know what we can do. I would invite you all to join iFest next month, which is another science of learning kind of event we do, and it does discuss human performance and the things that are going on, as well as come to ITSIC. So we're going to be back in person in late November, December. We will continue this discussion, not only at ITSIC, but in other webinars and other forums, because I think it is really, really important. And not only to do the adaptive part of this, but also to think about, when does somebody need to have that training? How do we combat the idea that we're just going to train everybody in a big block and then they're going to go off and forget? How much of this can we take forward in a pad or some sort of on the site training activity, to where it's not only adaptive in who is getting trained, but when they're getting trained. And I think that's sort of the next step. But I really thank everybody for being here, and I appreciate your time. And we will do our best to sort through the rest of the questions and be responsive to you all out in the audience for any future follow-ons that you want. So with that, thanks again, Janet and the team, and I'll turn it back over to the rest of your day. Thanks for being here.